about to hear wasn't intended to be a public recording. I was actually recording Helen for the Success 12 Stories episode, and I'll put the link to that below because I've cut out the information that's in there. And the backstory is this. Helen and I, at the turn of the century, we were members of a fourth way cult. Since then, we have gone our separate ways, done our separate things. And so we were kind of also catching up as well as recording that episode. But there was so much important information I felt in our chat that I wanted to share it with all of you. And Helen talks mostly about the awakening process, the integration process. And while it's extremely transformative, there are a lot of experiences which involve terror, etc. And so I think it's useful for all of us to learn from. Helen has watched the conversation and she's agreed to let me share it with you, but she does believe that there are some points that need further clarification. So we will be doing that soon as a follow-up. So stay tuned.
Yeah, this is an interesting story if you want to hear. Do you want to hear this?
Yeah, of course I do. Because listen, you should both, in case you don't remember, I joined when both you and Ivan were centre directors.
I was never the center director in London, but I had a role.
Okay, so all right.
Yeah.
Well, Ivan then, but
Ivan was.
Ivan was
the
okay.
center director.
But maybe it was as if you were centre director because
Exactly.
you were quite involved. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we were preparing for this big prospective student meeting at a hotel in London, where there were like hundreds of people, Ivan at that point was reading Adyashanti. So he was already getting into the non-dual teachings, which I had not encountered at that point. And as we were preparing to go on stage, he said to me, because I said, like, we were organizing, like, okay, you'll talk about this, I'll talk about this, you'll talk about the observer. And then he says to me, but who is observing?
And
it's
he's
like,
so cheeky, isn't he?
yes,
He's always
so
so cheeky. Yeah.
So it was like, Ivan, we have to get on stage. But it really stayed with me. Like there was this moment when our eyes met and he said to me, but who is the observer? And like that was the beginning of the end. And that's when I began to explore the non-dual teachings. And I began to see the deficiencies in the fourth way, or let's just say the fourth way is a great teaching to take you to a certain point, but not beyond. And then that like broke something in me. And then Ivan and I kind of went off and explored the non-dual teachings together after that. So it was probably in the year 2002 that I began exploring other teachings. And then ultimately in 2008, I left. And that's when like really powerful and extreme awakening experiences began to occur. And I think we talked about this in our last conversation. It was the desperation of not so much leaving that group, but it was the desperation of decades of spiritual practice that really brought me to my knees. It was the come to Jesus moment, so to speak. And then the miraculous really swept into my life. So profound, so extreme. And that in 2008 sort of began this 7-year process of unraveling and destruction and death, and clearing out and hollowing. Which is what the spiritual practice ultimately is about, getting to one's non-existence in a way.
But isn't it interesting that it all started when you let go?
Yes, I knew in 2008 I had to clear my interior space. Like it was this really clear understanding that there was an opportunity cost, and I had to completely clear my interior space for something to come in, if it was going to come in. But also I had reached the end of my rope and I didn't really believe in awakening anymore. And so it was clearing out of all ideas of awakening, clearing out of the fourth way, clearing out of all those relationships, completely clearing out my internal space to allow for something to come in. But also I had given up on something coming in. And it seems like that was like that complete exhaustion, surrender, disgust, desperation. That was what was needed. And then, as I said, once I was reduced to this like lump of flesh on the floor, then the miraculous swept into my life. That's one way to start.
Yeah.
Mm. I can see some resonance for you.
But I can feel it through you. I just feel what you say. It's not this idea of what you think. It's pure being what you've said. That's what it is. Which kind of like brings me, it's like there's a parlance going around at the moment which I don't quite understand, and maybe you've heard it, and it's like since my awakening, since I awakened, it's few people are saying it, and I don't know if it's like a school that uses that language, but I find it quite misleading because it makes it sound like you have an awakening experience.
Yep.
And by saying you've awakened, it means it's as if you've stopped doing anything, but it's something that has to be cultivated, or it's not even cultivated, it's a way of being that has to continue. It's not something that happens and, oh, I've done that, been there, done that. It's not that. And maybe you could explain a little bit about your understanding or the way that you see awakening.
Well, you sort of hit the nail on the head. Yeah, where to start? Ooh, that's so big. It's like it's the question in spirituality, and it's so big.
I mean, I know it has many
Yeah,
facets, so anything you say
yeah.
is an angle.
So I have an entire section on my website, which is as yet kind of unpublished. We talked about this in the past. I've sort of been in the shadows, anonymous. So anyhow, I have an entire section on my website and in the book that is taking 10 years to birth on the three phases of awakening. And I will just simply share from me. Oh, this is so hard to talk about, but it's people want to hear this. It's this strange paradox of talking about my awakening when there really isn't a person, something personal that awakens to itself. And so when you get to this understanding of post-personal existence, and then you ask me about my awakening, I have to kind of center myself into this story, which is a true story, but it'll never really sort of describe it accurately. I wrote 10 years ago, after the third shift in understanding, that awakening is not for the individual to fall into the peace and happiness of their being. It is the liberation of the cosmos. Because when you understand that your essential nature is the cosmos and is the absolute, it's the strange paradox. This whole concept of awakening becomes this sort of strange paradox. It's not for the individual to gain from. It's not the awakening of the person to something.
I think it's nice to get different perspectives of what people think, because we're dealing with a language now that has been pulled and bastardized.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important, without shaming anyone, without, pointing fingers, but let's just look at what this actually means. What language are we using, and how can we go forward to express what's really going on? Where are we? Because if we think we're there, when we're there, there's nowhere else to go. You're going to get stuck there, and it's infinite.
Yes. It's infinite. It's continuous. So, okay, without naming and shaming, and one of the reasons that I feel now more compelled to discuss these ideas publicly, from my background, probably in the last, since 2008 forward, is in the non-dual teaching space. So that's Kashmir Shaivism and Advaita Vedanta and the direct path and Neo Advaita. And my perception at this moment in time in the Western non-dual circles is that a lot of people are hanging out in this space of unity consciousness, what I call unity consciousness. Well, a lot of people call it unity consciousness. They're hanging out in this sort of transcendent state of unity consciousness, believing that is the end of the spiritual path. And um, when I was hanging out in in the state of unity consciousness, which is around 2012 or 2013, I was told by my teacher that I was done. Like this was it. You have awakened. And what you need to do now is integrate this experience in your life. And there was something in me that felt like, no, that there's something else I'm not getting, I'm not seeing. Like this felt like this was a portal to or an entry in or some other shoe was going to drop. Like I just had this intuition. And in this time frame of 2012 and 2013, I was like walking around in this 2 years in this like state of samadhi where distance had completely collapsed. Everything was immediately present. There was no there. There was no here. It was just this incredible effulgency of experiencing. And it was hard to integrate. I mean, driving 70 miles an hour without finding a there to the here, like I had to teach myself how to walk again. It was like that extreme. And around this time of 2012 and 2013, I started to attract students and I attracted a book editor. And like I was getting these signals like, this is it, you're done. This is, enlightenment. And I do have to say, incredible state of being. Like just this is what I call the second shift, because the first shift was pretty profound as well, which we'll talk about another time. But anyway, but there was something in me that was like, no, like, don't talk right now. Don't teach right now. I was writing prolifically, but as I said, there was something in me that just felt like, no, this is not it. This is not done. And it was actually a difficult conversation with my teacher at the time, because I said to him, I think there's something you're missing. And then I got my answer like a year later, and that was this is where words really fail. That could be described as a death, immersion into the absolute prior to consciousness, prior to I am. That took 10 years to integrate. So when that happened, I can't say it was an experience. I can say that it was the end of experience. It was the end of experiencing. It was the end of consciousness, non-existence. And I will say that all of our ideas of life and death are so completely wrong, so completely wrong. It took a good 2 years for me to be fully functional after that, and a good 10 years for me to integrate that understanding enough to actually start talking to people again now. And it never ends. So here's the thing. It's like the transcendent absolute meets absolute manifestation. And there is no difference between the transcendent and the relative. This is like this never ending existence as both transcendent and relative. From that standpoint of living in unity consciousness, I could never really connect to the relative in a way that other people did. Yeah, you get people saying things like, oh, if you believe in a yesterday.
I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, it's part of the non-dual teaching where we negate the idea of time and space in order to see who we are and what we are in our fundamental being and in the moment. But when you hang out in that unity consciousness space, you can't integrate. It's difficult to both see dually and non-dually because existence is both dual and non-dual. I'm really glad you're pressing me to talk about this
No,
today. You're the first person I've really had this this kind of
I
conversation
know,
with.
and I'm really honored, Helen. I really, really am. And you know, it's gonna get easier. It will get
Yeah.
easier. And in fact, I just want to ask you, like, during that period from unity consciousness onwards, how did you function day to day? Like, how did you deal with working? How did you deal
Yeah.
with socializing? Did you socialize?
The conditioned body mind of Helen is like tends to be a workaholic. So I've not never really done a lot of socializing, but I've done a lot of working. So let me think. In 2012, I was a chief digital officer for a company in Silicon Valley. So I left that and I actually started a law firm not too long after that. So I continued to work. My spiritual work was always the primary thing in my life, and my work life was always built around that. Like I was fortunate that I had enough flexibility in my life to arrange my work life around my spiritual work. Very fortunate. And so I've had a very, very successful career externally, but I've spent a tremendous effort and commitment to the spiritual work during those years. So anyway, yeah, I was a lawyer beginning in 2012, starting up a law firm. I did leave my career that I had had for 30 years in technology. There was a lot of flux in my life at that point. As I said, there was this period, let's say, of 6 months when I kind of had to literally, I had to re-engineer the idea of time and distance. Like I had to retrain myself to be able to see things at a distance, to be able to think about a future, to be
Mm.
able to see myself in relation to a past. It was really strange for like 6 months. And yeah, and then in the next 2 years, as I said, I was writing a lot about non-duality. I had people sort of coming to me to discuss these ideas with them. I was still working, but I didn't put a lot of energy into it. I mean, I had started a law firm, but I can't really say I started it with gusto. It was like barely existing. I barely paying the bills. And then when the shift occurred out of unity consciousness into the absolute or universal consciousness, you could say, that was incredibly destabilizing. That was the end of my marriage. That was selling my home. That was moving to one country. That was moving to another country. That was really trying to, can I swear on your podcast?
You
What,
may.
what the fuck is going on here? It's like, holy,
Yeah.
mind blown for a good 2 years.
Mm.
And as I said, this whole concept of life and death, I would say the one thing that came out of that was like, death is an illusion. We are all swimming in death. We are
Yeah.
all swimming in death. Nobody has anything to worry about from that standpoint. Like, all of our ideas about life and death are wrong. So anyway, took a good 2 years of like moving countries, ending a marriage, selling a home, uh, and then I kind of really went back to work in 2017. And it was at this period of time that I felt like there was just no way I can talk to anybody about this. No way. Because everything I had previously written from the standpoint of unity consciousness didn't have the gravitas or the truth of the next understanding that kind of arose.
Mm.
Let's the understanding from an absolute perspective, the understanding from Brahman. Brahman. I had really no intention of speaking about any of this with anyone until very recently. When
Lucky me.
yes, yes, it's so strange that you just sort of came about at the right time. I shared with you in our prior conversation what I see in the outside world, and I feel sort of compelled to say publicly, people don't have to live this way. Like what is happening in the world, it doesn't have to be this way. And so all these sort of confluences have come together. You and I reconnected, the book editor and I reconnected. I've started to work with people one-on-one now on the non-dual teaching anonymously. Whoever finds me, I don't charge for these conversations. And now I think I'm ready to go a little more public because of what I see in the outside world, because of what the level of destruction, the level of suffering, and also the level of spiritual bypassing. So this goes back to what you were saying about hanging out in samadhi. This is a form of spiritual bypass.
I believe that the timing is always perfect. So, you know, as you said, we don't actually have to do anything. We just have to be awake to when the call is there, or be awake to what is necessary. There's no searching or prodding or manipulating that's necessary. So the timing is right. What you said about death, I think that we've just inherited this negative idea of death. I really do.
Absolutely.
And so it's lovely that you've said what you've said. It's also there was one more thing when you said, what the fuck is going on here? I mean, yours is definitely a much deeper experience, or can I use that word, like sense from length of time and whatever. But when I was in that space, I didn't feel that I even had the time to
Yeah.
say what the fuck is going on here. You do not have the time, because you're literally, if you say that, you had to sort of like not be there. You know.
Yep.
So that was also quite interesting. There's no fear. You can't be fearful.
Exactly. So I don't have the exact quote, but Lakshmanju, which is kind of the modern father of Kashmir Shaivism, essentially said that yogis don't fear death. It's like a happy experience. And Andrew Harvey touched my heart in a video I saw recently where he's essentially said, like, for those that have died before they died, there is deathlessness. And in that deathlessness, there is courage and a fearlessness. So that kind of resonated with me at this time as I see what is occurring in the world.
Also, like, if you think about it, if you look at, you know, like some cultures or whatever, that you start with birth and then you have your, what is it, Holy Communion or baptism, Holy
Yeah,
Communion, blah, blah, blah. And you go through all these different stages. And then the last one is death. And if you look at it, if you look at it as a dance, or you look at it as an opera, or you look at it as a piece of theater, death can only be a finale. It's like the grand finale, you know,
yeah.
rather than this. Why does it have to be something that we don't want to reach there? You know,
That's a really good way of putting it. Yes.
it's always the
Yeah.
climax. It's the climax. I wonder if there's like some kind of, you know, dictionary that people are using that's confusing, you know?
When people, okay, so here's another reason why I have not been public. The sheer discomfort of somebody saying to me, "Are you enlightened or awakened?" I find very difficult. Like, and so my answer when I'm asked that question is I'm now very clear on things I wasn't clear about before. That's the way I answer the question.
Yeah.
I'm the whole idea of like, you're awake and you're not is false at it fundamentally. And yet there are people who know things.
Mm.
Like there are people who have come into a full body understanding, and there are people who viscerally no longer live from the standpoint of illusion or incompleteness. And so I would call that sort of an awakening of sorts. So the whole language around awakening and enlightenment in the West is so wrong and limited that in and of itself, I've had difficulty stepping out in public.
Yeah. Even though I've had experiences that have made me see more, they're just glimpses of the reality. I've literally just had a glimpse of a bit more.
So I will say this, those I feel, or my experience, I'll just speak from my experience. My experience is those glimpses are a doorway into a complete full body understanding that one would say actually constitutes a shift in identity. And so if we're talking The question is, what is your identity, or where do you rest your identity? That might be another way of phrasing it. So for me, there were very clearly shifts, like a complete shift from and to, out of and into, where it was like what was left behind was left behind. And that last shift that I mentioned to you that was incredibly destabilizing, that completely sort of changed my perspective of death and life, that was something that was so extreme. Like there was so much terror for like a 6-month period. I got glimpses. I was just on the edge. I got glimpses of this. And it was so terrifying that I stopped meditating. And then, but that was not enough. Anytime I would just sit on the couch, it came like right on the edge. And that was something where it came after me. I did not go after it. And then when that death occurred, like it happened so fast, I couldn't, like I tried to, in the prior attempts, the terror was so extreme that I would stop myself and do whatever I could to stop myself from falling into that state or samadhi or off the edge, into the abyss, into the void. There are definite shifts that are more than glimpses.
Yeah, for sure. But also when they start to happen, or like now that I'm talking to you, it kind of like it reminds me. There were also periods of time where I had no idea who I was, and it was so destabilizing because I
Yeah.
had no idea how I was going to react or respond because I was no longer the person that my mind still thought I was.
Yeah.
It's like it takes such a long time for the mind to actually catch up because I'm not that
Yes.
person anymore, or that
Yes.
person is not happening. And so the people
Exactly.
that are in front of me, like I was so not, I can't say I was scared. I just didn't know how I was going to respond. I had no idea. So
Yes.
that was it. And now that we're talking about it, that was about 5 years of not knowing who I was.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. Like that's like the new foundation on which to build one's humanness. It's like that emptiness that you have come into like contact with, that you viscerally embody this emptiness, and then you have to construct this individual person on that.
But there's not even any time to do the constructing because for me, like I am not able to okay, this is who I am, because I actually do not know. Like I don't think that I am anyone, in the sense of I don't, like, I remember the times when there would be definite moments when I was able to respond differently to the person that was stuck in this box, who was stubborn or would always react in a certain way. And I remember those stances where I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let it go. I'm just going to, never mind. I'm going to be kinder. I'm going to let that, whatever it was always, I knew that if I didn't, I would just be heavy. If I wanted to be light, I had to not be that person that was being stubborn, not be that person that was digging my heels in. So, all those little things that were occurring. And then at some point, when you're faced with something and you don't react internally as you did, then you have no idea what you're standing on.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly the case. There's no really, it's like this emptiness, like there's a not, that's what the not knowing.
Yeah.
That is living in not knowing.
Yeah. And then there's also the not knowing. Well, it's like you said, if you're going to allow the music to play, to just be this hollow reed for divinity to play through you, you can't plan.
Exactly.
There's no planning.
There you go.
Yeah.
So ultimately, like being present is this sort of centeredness in what is, and whatever results from that isness, whatever manifests from that isness. But this is the double-edged sword about like not spiritual bypassing, because part of that isness is in recognizing that we have intersubjectively agreed that we are doing. We have intersubjectively agreed that we are people that are doing things. There is life and death. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
brings the question of grace, which, you know, this whole conversation, I mean, that we could have one whole podcast just on grace.
Yes. Let's do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Question of grace.
Who is doing exactly? Like, I went to this Vipassana recently, and it was the first one I'd ever done, and you're observing everything, and the idea is to be open to whatever is, and that's it, and it was so profound.
Yeah, I did that retreat. I'll tell you about it another time. But yes, it was very, very powerful. After the second shift, which was a slower shift, the first shift happened in a moment. It literally happened in a moment. As I reached for something, I looked at my hands. I was like, oh, this is different. Like totally like, wow, the second shift was more over time. And one of the stories that I tell is, well, I like taking baths. So I was looking at the end of the bathtub, and I saw my foot and the faucet. And it's like, I know one of them is supposed to be me, but I cannot figure out which one. Like, is the foot me or is the faucet me?
Wow.
And it's like, literally, the mind was confused, because that's when I say, like, so over about a 6-month period, maybe a little bit longer, that's when I was walking, and then suddenly I was not moving, but rather the images were coming up to me.
Yeah. Yes.
So like I was this peaceful, silent, spacious, immovable, and everything was coming up to me. So when you say about like not knowing who you are, then your idea of yourself is no longer confined to this body and this psychology, but then the entirety of the world is your body in your experience, because you cannot you cannot locate yourself, what you called yourself, in your experience. And then, well, because you have to move about in life, as I said before, like I had to like reprogram my mind to then bring back the dual concepts of the world, so that I could interact with people and get things done, and also not so that I could take care of this body.
Yeah.
As a
Helen, do you recall any change in your breathing or your blood pressure during?
No,
nothing.
I can't say that I did. I would say that I settled into a peacefulness that I had not been in touch with, let's just say, or people also noticed that I was different. People noticed that I was not fearful, that I was not grasping, I was not driven. It was so clear. Even my husband said to me one day, like, where is this fearful person I used to know?
I love what you said, that it just doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't. And so, you know, Helen, I really look forward to being able to share more of what you have to offer, because you have so much to offer. And I'm sure there are many people that are ready to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Natasha, for allowing me to speak about these things.
No, I mean, it's just incredible that you reached out. It really is. For me, I'm very grateful to you, and I look forward to, you know, seeing where this goes.
Yeah, I guess we'll be in touch.
Yes, yes, we will definitely. What I will first do is I'll obviously I'll be. If you've made it this far, you'll be happy to know that there will be a follow-up conversation on this. So stay tuned. And I'd just like to say that I really appreciate you being here. Till next time.